So the next example I want to share with you is known as the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital Study. It was conducted in 1963, so again, just before the Declaration of Helsinki. Now, we know that studies were conducted at this Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in New York City to develop information on the nature of human transplant rejection process. So we're looking at human transplants and then seeing how these transplants were rejected or not. So what happened was chronically ill patients who did not have cancer were injected with live human cancer cells. And then physicians did not inform the patients what they were doing. Now, interestingly, the rationale that the physicians gave for their actions was that they didn't want to scare their patients, and they thought the cells would be rejected. So kind of interesting how researchers' priorities can get really skewed. And that's, again, one of the reasons why we need to have ethics committees to protect these research participants from researchers that can get a little fanatical in their thinking. So it's quite incredible if you ask me. I mean, it's quite incredible. You can look at this and go, I just can't believe it. But these are real cases that have happened. Hence, I'm raising it for you. So no informed consent. Participants were not told about what was going to happen to them. Risks associated with the study were obviously not reduced. They were even injected with live cancer cells. Researchers did not protect participants against remote harm. They even caused harm for participants. So basically, a research study like this should never happen to begin with. It should be stopped by ethics committees because it can result in death and injury. Another classic example, there's even a film on this, if you want to watch, there's a short film being made on this, really, really interesting. So you can go to the website that I've put on the slide there, and you can actually watch it. It's incredible. This study took place in the early 1960s by Stanley Milgram. He was a social psychology researcher at Yale University, and he was really interested in one of the defenses that a lot of the German guards gave at the Nuremberg trials to justify their behavior during World War II. A lot of them defended themselves by saying, but we were just following orders. A lot of other people were saying, oh, that's ridiculous. So Milgram wanted to look at this, and he wanted to see how far would other people go if they were given orders. So even though his studies were designed to learn about conditions of obedience and disobedience, Milgram used deception to recruit participants by calling his study, his project, a learning and memory study. That's what he was saying that his study was. He deceived the participants. Anyway, let me describe what he did. So he got participants for his study. He didn't tell them what he actually was studying. He really wanted to know how far would people go under orders of what to do, normal, regular people. And so these naive participants believed they were applying real punishment by giving increasing levels of electric shocks to a supposed learner that was in a different room, but it was actually an actor in the other room that never got any shocks. But if they answered incorrectly, then this participant that Milgram had recruited had to supposedly give these electric shocks of increasing intensity. And then the so-called learner, who was an actor in the next room, would scream out in pain, right, if they got things wrong. So what he was really testing is how far would these people giving these electric shock punishments go when they were under orders to do so. It's really incredible. I really highly recommend watching the video, because what you see if you watch the video is these people that are supposedly delivering these electric shock punishments. Some of them went really far, giving life-threatening electric shocks to the learners, and the learners were screaming in pain in the next door room, but they kept going because Milgram told them to do so. So that's what's quite incredible. At the end of the study, the deception was revealed. So the punisher found out that it actually wasn't real. But since this study was published, it's been criticised because of the extreme psychological stress experienced by some of these participants. They thought they were actually giving real shocks, and they went along with it because they were told to do so. So because of this deception, they didn't really get informed consent. This study has been criticised quite a bit. I find it really, really interesting. The short video that I've got the website URL listed up the top there for, it's a short video clip that won the 1997 Best Student Production Award. It's really worthwhile watching. It's very short, but there are some really interesting take-home messages that we can learn from this. And one of the major ones was how few of these human beings refused to obey the orders to provide these shocks, with the actor next door literally screaming in pain. So most continued to provide those shocks because they were told to do so. There's also some really sad outcomes after the experiment, including psychological stress to these participants. Many of these participants were really visibly distressed. You see it in the videos. And some were trembling, sweating, they had nervous laughter, they were biting their lips, they were digging their fingernails into their palms during the experiments, and some even ended up having seizures. This is not the guys that were next door, the actors. So that was what was the most shocking, was that Milgram found that most of the participants kept increasing and delivering these false shocks, despite the subjects or the actors next door screaming in pain. And 65% of those participants administered that final lethal level shock. But you can also see here several ethical problems, right? First of all, there was deception. The researchers did not tell the participants what they were actually studying. And the second ethical issue here is that right to withdraw, the right to stop. So these guys were obviously really distressed, and some of them wanted to stop. And there was also no reducing the harm or the risks of these people, the psychological harm to these people. And this is where or why this study's received a lot of criticism. It's become quite a controversial classic study that's out there. Then there was the tea room trade study in the mid-1960s. And this was a study conducted by Lord Humphreys for his PhD dissertation. He was a sociologist, and he was interested in learning about what motivated men who had anonymous sex in public bathrooms or washrooms. So, as you do, he was interested in determining their personal characteristics and also the nature of the sexual activity that they undertook. So there were two parts to the study. So in the first part, he befriended men and acted as a lookout. Since there were public toilets or washrooms in a park, the researcher would be able to take down some of the men's license plate numbers, and then he obtained identifying information on these men by tracing their car license plates via a policeman friend of his. And then a year later, the second part of the study, the researcher utilised this identifying information that he obtained to contact and then subsequently interview the men in their own homes. Now, to avoid being recognised, he altered his appearance, Humphreys, the researcher, and claimed that he was conducting a study on health issues. Again, there have been many concerns raised about this study because there's many breaches of these ethical standards. For example, the use of deception and the lack of opportunity of these participants to provide informed consent. They didn't give their personal information, so the whole Privacy Act thing is sort of going out the window. It's again breaching a lot of these ethical standards. So before we continue, test yourself on these 3 studies that we've covered and just make sure you're picking up on the key breaches of ethical issues here, the key concepts that we've covered.